All right, so this is going to be project number 2. If you didn't watch the first one and you feel a little bit lost, go ahead and check it out. We're going to do pretty much everything we did in the first video again. Um, Not everything, but a lot of it, but we'll do it a lot faster. So what I want to do in this video is going to be a little bit of scripting with images. We're going to learn how to get some input from the keyboard and move things around on the screen. So I'm going to click a new project. Remember, our template we're going to use is 2D. And I'm going to call this thing, actually let's find a directory where to put this. I am going to call it project 2. How many of these am I going to do? 10,000 of them? All right. Oops, okay. Oops, how about if I do it this way? Folder project 00002. There we go, select folder. And a project name is going to be Unity 2018 2D images scripting. All right, and if you've never done programming before, you are in the right spot because this is where we're going to learn to do some basic programming. So this is how I've got everything set up, and we are good to go. Create that project. The other thing I'm going to look for while Unity is loading up is to make sure that I have some images. And again, I am going to use, like we did last time, the glitch assets. So you can search for your glitch assets. They are in the public domain and are a great source for doing 2D projects in Unity. And hopefully this project comes up. Look at our progress bar there. Should be up any second now. There we go, loading all kinds of fun stuff. And we are up and going. Good. Okay, so the beginning part of this, I'm going to go a little bit quick because we already talked about these sorts of things. So I'm going to bring in an image that I want to move around with the keyboard. So I'm going to go to my glitch images here. And let's see, what would be a good thing that we would want to move around with the keyboard? Oh, this little lizard guy. Sure, why not? Little lizard guy. Here we go. Little lizard guy coming in. If we look at our camera, we've got this blue background. I am going to change the background color to just white. So 255 on all of these to get us a white background. And I'm going to drag my little guy in here. And if I look at my game view tab, there he is. And if I hit run, there it is. That's great. And what I want to be able to do is move this thing. I'll scale it up. Why not? Move it around with the arrow key. Let's just move it around. Because if I hit play right now, I can hit the arrow key all day long and nothing's going to happen because nobody knows what is supposed to happen, so we have to tell it. And the way we're going to do that is write a very, very short C# script and attach it to this object so that it knows what to do when we press the arrow key. Now, a couple things. Let's say initially we want to say when we press left, we want this thing to move to the left. So what is actually happening? I can just think about it in my head. I can move this thing around and say, okay, I want it to do that. I want it to move to the left. But what is really happening, if we look over here on the upper right, we're looking at this position .x. So all of our objects have 3 coordinates, an x, y, and a z. In 2D, we're not going to be really too concerned with the z because that involves depth, but we're really going to be concerned with the x and y axis. So x is left and right, y is up and down. And so when we hit the left arrow, what we want to have happen is this x value. I'm going to hover over x with my mouse, click on it, move it to the left, see x is going down. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's what I want to have happen when I hit the left arrow, is I want this x value to get smaller and smaller and smaller. That's all. All we got to do, but we got to write the software to do that. So we are going to do that, and I'm going to come down here in my assets folder and right-click and say create C# script, and we will call it player controller. So as soon as it created it, it prompts me to type in a name, and I did it right away. And there we go. If you didn't type it in right away, you can click on it here. I'm just clicking on the word down here. Yours may say new behavior .cs or something like that. You just click on it once, and you can start renaming it. No big deal. Now that we got it here, double click on it. Open up in Visual Studio. And loading our great project. And here we go. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's a little bit bigger. These scripts are going to be very short. We're probably going to write maybe 4 or 5 lines of code to move this thing around, so it's not going to be that huge. And here we are. So one thing I just want to double check and make sure that if you had to rename this player, this file, if you had to rename it, the name of this file has to match the name of this class. So if you were doing some renaming business over here, you've got to rename this thing as well. So in my case, they match. And if you followed along exactly, yours is going to match too. But if you had to rename this thing, yours won't match. And so then just type it in here, whatever you called it. Okay, so Unity gives us a couple things by default. If you're new to coding, lots of curly braces. They're not scary. They help us organize things. This open curly brace starts a section, and the closing curly brace ends a section, and you can have sections within sections throughout the whole thing. This is the start of a class. This is an end of a class, and within that class, we have starts of functions and ends of functions, just like this. Don't be too concerned with all of this stuff right now. Maybe it seems overwhelming, but that's all right. Just follow along, and eventually it'll start to click. But we're going to work through this. So a function is a place to put a series of commands that happen at certain times, essentially. So right here, this one's called start. And surprisingly enough, this function gets called as soon as your game starts. So if there's anything that you want to have happen right when the game starts, you are going to put stuff inside of here, between this curly brace and this curly brace. If you want to have something happen every time the frame is updated, so right now we are running by default at 60 frames a second, and this update function gets called every frame update. So 60 times a second, this thing is going to get called, and any commands that we have between this curly brace and this curly brace are going to be executed. And so it seems like for checking for inputs, this would be a way better place to put it than up here. Because if we put it up here, we would only check for inputs when the game first started, whereas right here we're checking every frame update, which seems like a good idea. If you're way into coding, I am oversimplifying a lot of this, but that's okay. It's okay to simplify things. And the more of these videos we go through, we're going to start to branch out and explain these in slightly different ways. But I think this is the best way to start going through these things. Okay, so this function, anything we put between these two curly braces is going to be looked at 60 times a second, and that's what we're going to do. What we want to check, and these two slashes, like this, those are comments. And so anything you put in there is not a program. It's just kind of notes to yourself. So I'm going to put out some notes to myself and say, we want to check if the left arrow is pressed. If it is, we want to move the character to the left. Okay, so these are the two things that we want to do. I think it's always a good idea to write this stuff out. That way you don't confuse yourself partway through. You might forget what you're trying to do. Even on simple things, I think it's a good idea to write down. Okay, so we want to check and see if the left arrow is pressed. How do we do that? Everything is different. Oh gosh, turn on my battery. There we go. Every programming language is going to be slightly different in how you do this, but part of it is the logic is always going to be the same. We just have to know how to do that. And in Unity, you start to know these things just by using them over and over again. This is all in C#, so if you know some C#, a lot of this is going to look familiar. But let's just get to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type it out and then explain what it is. So how do we check if the left arrow is pressed? We say this. If, look at that, if. Input.get key code left arrow. Okay, so if input makes sense, we're getting something from our input subsystem. We're looking for a key. This could be a get button or something to do with mouse or whatever you've got. Right now we're looking at the keyboard, so .get key, and we've got a parenthesis. What key are we looking for? Left arrow. This is how we tell it, keycode.left arrow. Anything between these parentheses is going to be used to determine if this thing is actually happening or not. And if it is, we're going to put the code just between curly braces. So just like we say, if we're kind of starting at the beginning, any of our start code goes between these curly braces, and then our update code goes between these two curly braces. So now in this if the left arrow is being pressed, we're going to have our own curly braces to say this is the code we're putting in here that is gonna handle the case when the left arrow is pressed. All right, so an open and a close. And I'm going to move this line up and put it here. So if the left arrow is being pressed, we want to move the character to the left. That's what we want to do. And if we go back to Unity and we click on our little guy, remember what we want to do is change the X value here. And the X value of the position happens to be part of this transform. It's called transform of this section. So in the transform section, we want to change the X value of the position. Sounds wordy, but it's not really that bad. And how do we do that? Well, what we need to do is figure out where our character currently is. What is our current position? Then we want to change that X value to make it smaller. And then we want to update our position. That's what we're going to do. 3 things. So our current position is going to be a vector 2 because we only care about left and right. Position equals transform dot position. All right. This may be a little bit confusing, but I think it's important to do it this way just so we can figure it out. So we're going to create a new what they call variable, and it's of type vector 2, so it has an X and a Y, and we're going to set it equal to our transform dot position. So we look over here, transform dot position. It's going to have these 2 coordinates associated with it. That's what this position is. Then we're going to say position dot x equals position dot x minus 0.1. And we're going to put an F in there for float. Floating points are decimals, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. Integers are counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so first we got our position. Where are we currently at? We stored it in this. And then we're going to update it to say we need to move to the left. Now this transform.position is the one that's actually tied to our object. This one here is just a temporary thing that we're using to modify. We do all sorts of things. But we don't update our real position of our character until we're done doing all these math problems. In this case, it's pretty straightforward because the math problem is just one line, move to the left. So then we'll say transform dot position equals position. Okay, so this is the position of our character. We make a copy of it over here. We do some work on it. And then we update, we say our transform dot position equals position. This is this new one that we've been messing around with. And that's it. So now if I hit Control S to save this thing, and I go back to Unity and hit play, now when I hit left arrow, it does nothing. I wonder why. We wrote this super nice script, all this code. We made our comments that said what we're supposed to do. It all made sense. It looks right, but there is a problem. The problem is we didn't tell Unity which character is associated with this script. If we had a whole bunch of images on the screen, how would it know which one it's supposed to respond to the arrow presses? So we have to tell it. And if we click on our lizard, this is the thing that we want to have move, right? Is this lizard. And what we're going to do is with this thing selected, I'm going to click down here in the asset window at this player controller script, and I'm going to drag it over here to the right in this empty gray rectangle. So I'm going to click on it and drag it over. Now with this lizard selected, player controller script is a part of this object. So now we've associated the script with this object, which means all the code inside of this thing is going to affect this lizard object. So now when I hit play, there it goes. And let's go back. This thing right here is essentially the speed. So if I change that to 0.01 and go back, now it's going way slower because it's subtracting less than it did last time. And there's a really cool thing that we can do. Working on code is hard. Not everybody can do that. So what I can do is I can make a variable up at the top. I'm going to call it public float speed equals 0.1f. We'll just set it to a default of 0.1. Now, anywhere we use the word speed, it's going to have this value. So I can change this to speed. That way, when we want to do, maybe we want to do a right arrow thing, which we will do, we can use the same speed, and we don't have to keep typing 0.1f everywhere. We just type the word speed. Let's see, does that work? Should go faster now, right? There it goes. Yep. But the really important, cool thing about that variable is now with our lizard selected, we come over here to the properties window, it shows up here, just like it did with our position and stuff. And so we can change this in here to 0.15 and run it, and it'll go way faster. So instead of going back to the code all the time and typing in all of this stuff, we can change parameters just by doing it here, 0.1. So how would we make this thing go to the right? Well, we should always use something that we know is working and then move from there. So I'm going to copy and paste this thing. Moving to the left works. I right-clicked to copy, and then I Control-V to paste it. But now we want to move to the right. So let's just read through this thing word by word. Get key. We want to change this to right arrow. Oops. What did I do? Right arrow. Okay. Then we get our position. All that's going to be the same. But now, instead of minusing speed, we want a plus. Because when we move to the right, our x gets bigger. So plus speed, then we're done. Save it. I'm going left. Now I'm going right. And then think about how do we do this with up and down? Well, easy things. We know how to talk about which arrow we're looking for. And then how do we adjust our positions? We've been working on X's, which is horizontal. So to go up and down, we're going to do Y's. And that's it. I'll zoom out a little bit to see this full code. There it is. So we made a public variable, did some if statements, assigned our script to this object, and that was it. And I'll save this project. And we're done. So that's all I wanted to show you. Intro to scripting. That's how we can get control of objects and do different things inside of Unity.